You know that feeling when you're trying to remember something really important, and it's like right there on the tip of your tongue? You just can't quite grasp it.
Mm-hmm. Like there's a barrier.
Exactly. Feels like there's a barrier. And well, today we're diving into why understanding ourselves can sometimes feel just like that, like trying to see your reflection clearly in a really fogged up mirror.
Yeah.
We want to kind of wipe that fog away, right?
Yeah.
Get a clearer picture of what's actually going on inside us. And also understand why that first glimpse can feel so, well, why we feel so resistant to it.
That resistance, that's such a key point. Think of it this way. Our minds aren't just, passively recording things.
Right.
They're actively working all the time, really trying to protect us, especially our core sense of who we are, the ego.
Protect us from what, though?
Well, sometimes that protection means keeping difficult, maybe painful truths sort of out of our direct line of sight, out of our awareness. And this is really the realm of the unconscious. It's this incredibly powerful force that shapes our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, often without us even having a clue it's happening.
It sounds like those moments where maybe you have a really strong reaction to something totally out of proportion, and later you're thinking, wow, where on earth did that come from?
Precisely. That's often the unconscious bubbling up.
It reminds me a bit of those early psychological case studies you read about, like Anna O, where she had all these bizarre physical symptoms.
The talking cure origin, in a way.
Right. And it turned out they were all linked back to these really deeply buried traumatic emotional experiences she hadn't processed.
Exactly. And it suggests really strongly that we all have these hidden undercurrents. Maybe not as dramatic as Anna O's case, but they're there, influencing us in ways we might not immediately grasp.
So a big takeaway right at the start here is that some of our present-day struggles, anxieties, or patterns might actually have roots we're completely unaware of, hidden away.
Precisely. And this leads us to something quite fundamental, a core observation in psychoanalysis. The human psyche often holds this simultaneous desire and resistance when it comes to uncovering these hidden parts.
So we want to know, but we also don't want to know.
Kind of, yeah. We have this genuine curiosity, this drive to understand ourselves better. But at the same time, there's this unconscious pushback. Think about dreams you forget the moment you wake up.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. Gone.
They often contain really valuable insights, but our mind just sort of wipes the slate clean. Or maybe you feel this vague sense of anxiety that just hangs around, but there's no obvious reason for it.
Definitely, that background hum of unease.
That can be part of it too. So the real question becomes, why does facing our inner world, our own truths, sometimes feel so threatening? What are we so instinctively trying to avoid looking at?
And what's the actual cost of staying in that fog, of not looking?
Right. What's the price of that ignorance? It's interesting you mentioned anxiety or even depression. Freud saw these symptoms often as compromise formations.
Compromise formations, what does that mean exactly?
It's like the mind finding an indirect way to signal a deeper, unresolved conflict. It can't bring the core issue fully into consciousness because it's too threatening, so it creates a symptom. Instead, the anxiety, the phobia, the obsession as a kind of compromise.
So if the unconscious is like this, I don't know, hidden storehouse of difficult experiences and feelings, then these symptoms are almost like coded messages trying to get our attention, trying to surface somehow.
That's a great way to put it, coded messages. Now, imagine you actually start trying to confront one of these buried issues. You decide, okay, I'm going to explore this feeling.
Yeah.
You might notice a subtle shift inside. Maybe a feeling of unease creeps in, or perhaps even a physical sensation. Your stomach tightens, you feel restless.
Oh, interesting. So the body gets involved too.
Absolutely. This bodily response can directly mirror the internal psychological resistance we experience when we're getting close to uncovering something significant. It's almost like the body knows or anticipates what the conscious mind is still trying to avoid.
So this resistance we're talking about, it's not just consciously thinking, nope, don't want to go there. It's deeper than that, more automatic.
Oh, much deeper, much more automatic. Resistance is like this intricate web of defenses that just kick in without us thinking.
Like what? What kind of defenses?
Well, we might suddenly find ourselves procrastinating massively on anything that involves self-reflection. Or we might start rationalizing our behavior.
Making excuses.
Exactly. Coming up with perfectly logical sounding explanations that actually serve to mask deeper fears or anxieties. Sometimes it's just this overall feeling of being stuck, like you're wading through treacle, unable to move forward on something important. It's the psyche's way of trying to maintain a certain balance, a status quo, even if that status quo isn't actually serving us well anymore.
Okay, so the fog on our metaphorical mirror, it isn't just random interference. It's actually made up of these defense mechanisms.
Precisely.
Things like denial, maybe, where we just refuse to accept something that feels too threatening.
Yes, denial is a classic one. Or projection. That's where we take our own unwanted feelings, maybe anger or insecurity, and we see them in other people instead of ourselves.
Right, it's easier to say they're angry than I'm angry.
Much easier for the ego. And then there's displacement. That's when you redirect an emotion, usually a difficult one like anger, from its original source onto a safer target.
Like yelling at your kids when you're actually furious with your boss.
Exactly that scenario. Each of these acts like another layer of fog on the mirror. They build up over time, often starting in childhood, all designed to protect us from immediate psychic pain or discomfort.
But here's the paradox, right? While these defenses give us some short-term relief, in the long run, they can actually stop us from, well, from growing, from really understanding ourselves.
That's the crucial point. These unresolved conflicts, the things we push away, they don't just evaporate, they fester. They continue to exert influence from the unconscious.
So the very tools we use to protect ourselves can end up being the walls of our own prison, in a way. The biggest obstacles.
That's a powerful metaphor, and often very true. And it highlights that self-knowledge isn't like finding a hidden object, a one-time discovery. It's an ongoing process.
Right. Not a destination, but a journey.
Exactly. It requires this willingness to keep engaging with uncertainty, with ambiguity, with those less comfortable corners of our inner world.
Yeah.
And taking that first step, approaching that fogged mirror, often stirs up some really fundamental fears.
Like what? What are we typically afraid of finding?
Well, maybe the fear that seeing ourselves clearly will demand massive change in our lives, change we don't feel ready for.
Or maybe confronting parts of ourselves we've always ignored or disliked, aspects we find shameful.
Yes. Or perhaps it means taking responsibility for our actions or our patterns in ways we haven't before, facing our own contributions to our problems.
It really does shine a light on that internal battleground, doesn't it? That idea of psychic conflict.
It absolutely does. That constant negotiation, sometimes a real struggle, between our different inner drives and forces our instinctual desires, what Freud called the id, our moral compass, the superego.
Our conscience.
Yes. And our sense of reality, the ego, trying to manage it all. Standing before that foggy mirror brings all that inherent tension right to the surface.
The desire for truth clashing with the fear of truth.
In that moment, yes. The desire for clarity crashes right into the fear of what that clarity might actually reveal about us, about our lives, about our past. So as you, the listener, consider your own internal landscape, just remember that even approaching that metaphorical mirror, that first flicker of wanting to understand yourself better, well, that takes real courage.
It's not a small step.
Not at all. Every journey towards greater self-awareness, every bit of therapeutic work, it begins with that brave, often quite hesitant, first step towards the fog.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper then into what you called the architecture of avoidance, these defense mechanisms. You mentioned repression. That sounds like a really big one.
It is. Repression is essentially the unconscious process of pushing painful or unacceptable memories, thoughts, or impulses out of our conscious awareness, shoving them down.
But they don't just vanish.
No, not at all. That's the key. These repressed feelings or memories, they don't disappear. They can resurface, often in disguised forms. Perhaps as seemingly unrelated issues, maybe sudden social anxiety or unexplained physical symptoms like headaches or fatigue.
So the mind tries to bury it, but it keeps kind of leaking out sideways.
Yeah.
In different disguises.
That's a good way to think about it, leaking out sideways. And then you mentioned projection earlier. Taking feelings we find unacceptable in ourselves, maybe envy or aggression or vulnerability, and attributing them to other people.
Yeah, it makes the world feel a bit simpler, maybe, if they are the problem, not me.
Exactly. It protects our self-image. And denial is another very powerful defense, just flat out refusing to acknowledge a threatening reality, even when the evidence is staring you in the face.
Like someone with a serious drinking problem insisting they're just a social drinker.
A classic example. And we touched on displacement redirecting emotions. The boss yells at you, you can't yell back, so you go home and snap at your partner or kick the cat, metaphorically speaking.
It sounds like these aren't just working one by one, though. They kind of weave together.
Oh, absolutely. They often operate in complex combinations. Think about rationalization.
Making up good reasons for things.
Pretty much. We construct these seemingly logical plausible explanations for our behavior or feelings to avoid facing the real, often less comfortable underlying reasons.
Like someone saying, oh, I'm not avoiding intimacy, I'm just, really focused on my career right now.
Precisely. When the deeper truth might be a profound fear of vulnerability or rejection learned long ago, rationalization helps us maintain that positive self-image while neatly sidestepping the core issue.
And this resistance, it shows up in therapy too, doesn't it? When people are actively trying to work on themselves.
Very much so. It can manifest in all sorts of ways. Forgetting appointments, suddenly feeling tired and wanting to end the session, changing the subject abruptly when something uncomfortable comes up.
Or maybe getting really intellectual about feelings instead of actually feeling them.
Yes, intellectualization is another defense. Talking about sadness instead of feeling sad. These are all ways the psyche tries, unconsciously, to protect its existing structures, even if those structures are causing pain.
It really makes sense that our earliest experiences, especially in childhood, would be so crucial in forming these defense patterns.
Absolutely fundamental. Childhood memories, particularly difficult or traumatic ones, can heavily influence the specific kinds of protective mechanisms we develop and rely on throughout life.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a child who learned very early on that expressing anger led to punishment or withdrawal of affection.
Okay.
That child might develop a powerful defense of suppressing anger altogether. As an adult, they might find it almost impossible to assert themselves or express dissatisfaction, even in situations where it's perfectly healthy and necessary. The old pattern just kicks in automatically.
Wow. So these patterns get deeply ingrained.
Very deeply. And it's fascinating, again, how our bodies and minds communicate these underlying conflicts through symptoms. A nagging headache, that recurring dream you can't quite shake, a persistent feeling of anxiety. These can all be viewed as these compromise formations.
Right, the coded messages again.
Exactly. They represent this kind of internal negotiation, a balance between our hidden desires or fears and the constraints imposed by our internal censor or past experiences.
And you also mentioned transference earlier. That sounds important too.
Hugely important. Transference is the unconscious tendency to project feelings, attitudes, and expectations from significant past relationships, usually with parents or early caregivers, onto people in our present lives.
So I might react to my boss like I used to react to my critical father, even if the boss hasn't actually done anything critical.
Precisely. Or we might find ourselves repeatedly choosing romantic partners who unconsciously remind us of a parent and recreate familiar, sometimes unhealthy relationship dynamics from our childhood.
Trying to fix the past in the present, maybe?
Often, yes. Or we might even sabotage our own success because unconsciously we fear outshining a parent, or we feel unworthy of achievement based on old messages.
But it's not all doom and gloom with defenses, is it? You mentioned sublimation as maybe a more constructive one.
Yes, absolutely. Sublimation is a really interesting concept. It's considered a more mature defense mechanism where socially unacceptable impulses or energies are transformed into socially acceptable and often valuable activities.
How does that work?
Well, someone with, say, strong aggressive impulses might channel that energy into becoming a successful surgeon or a competitive athlete, or powerful sexual energy might be channeled into creating art or music.
So it's taking that raw energy and refining it.
Exactly, it's putting it to productive use.
Oh.
However, it's worth noting that even seemingly positive adaptations like sublimation can sometimes have hidden costs.
Like what?
Like the driven workaholic who is sublimating a need for connection or avoiding deeper relationship issues by pouring everything into their career. It looks successful on the surface, but there might be an underlying deficit.
What's really striking about all of this is how much of it operates completely outside our conscious awareness.
That's the power of the unconscious. That's what makes these defenses so effective at protecting us in the short term, but also what makes them so persistent and resistant to change. We're often running on these old programs without even realizing the software is outdated.
Right, we're on autopilot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maintaining these defenses, keeping that lid clamped down, takes psychic energy.
It must be exhausting.
It can be incredibly draining. Suppressed emotions have to find an outlet somewhere, somehow, and the energy we expend just keeping things buried is energy that could otherwise be available for growth, creativity, connection, for engaging fully with life.
It also really complicates our relationship with truth, doesn't it? Especially self-truth. We end up building these elaborate stories.
Self-deception becomes almost necessary to maintain the defenses. It reminds me of the concept of cognitive dissonance, too. That tendency we have to avoid information that contradicts our existing beliefs or self-image, and to seek out information that confirms them, even if our beliefs are based on illusion or defense. We prefer the comforting story over the unsettling truth.
And you mentioned the unconscious has its own logic, different from our everyday thinking.
Very different. It doesn't operate on linear time or rational cause and effect in the same way. It's more symbolic, associative, driven by emotion and instinct. Dreams offer a fantastic window into this.
Freud's royal road to the unconscious.
Exactly. Dreams provide a space where repressed wishes, fears, and conflicts can surface, but often in a disguised, symbolic form that needs deciphering. Even our daydreams or childhood fantasies can be seen as these kinds of safe zones for exploring thoughts or desires that feel forbidden in reality.
What about when we see ourselves or others in really extreme terms? Like someone is either all good or all bad.
That's often referred to as splitting. It's considered a more primitive defense mechanism, often stemming from very early experiences where integrating contradictory aspects of a person that someone can be both loving and frustrating, for example, feels overwhelming.
So it's a way to simplify things.
It simplifies a complex and often overwhelming reality, yes, but it leads to very unstable perceptions of self and others, and can really wreak havoc on relationships and self-esteem. Things shift dramatically from idealization to devaluation.
And what about being passive-aggressive? Is that a defense too?
Yes, definitely. It's an indirect way of expressing negative feelings like anger or resentment. Instead of stating the feeling directly, which might feel too risky or confrontational, the feeling is acted out through procrastination, sullenness, forgetting things, backhanded compliments.
Expressing hostility without taking direct responsibility for it.
Precisely. It's another way to manage difficult emotions without facing them head on.
It really sounds like these defenses are incredibly tangled up together. It's not just one or two operating, but this whole unique system for each person.
Exactly right. Each individual develops their own unique constellation of defenses, like a psychological fingerprint, shaped by their specific life history, temperament, and experiences. Understanding these intricate patterns requires careful attention, patience, and often professional guidance.
So a big part of therapy, then, is helping people actually see these unconscious patterns.
Yes, to recognize the defenses as they operate in real time, and then gradually, carefully, learn to modify them. The goal isn't usually to eliminate defenses entirely, we need some, but to replace rigid, outdated, maladaptive mechanisms with more flexible, conscious, and healthier ways of coping with life's challenges.
It's pretty mind-blowing how deeply embedded these protective systems are and how much they steer our daily lives, our choices, our relationships, often totally beneath the radar.
It truly is, and simply beginning to recognize that they exist, that this unconscious dynamic is at play within you, well, that awareness itself is a profoundly significant first step towards living a more conscious, authentic life.
So, what happens then as these defenses maybe start to soften a bit? As we do the work, maybe in therapy or through self-reflection, does the mirror just become clear?
Well, not usually instantaneously clear. It's often more like looking into a cracked mirror.
Okay.
The reflection might still be distorted, fragmented even, but now through those cracks you start to get glimpses, fragmented but revealing glimpses of what lies beneath the surface fog.
That sounds like a moment of insight, maybe?
It can be what we sometimes call the analytic moment. It's not necessarily a huge lightning bolt, but often a subtle yet significant shift in perception. Something clicks into place.
That makes me think back to Anna O again. Those breakthroughs she had, where talking about a memory seemed to release the pent-up emotion and the symptom would just dissolve.
Exactly. Those cathartic moments where understanding connects with feeling can be incredibly powerful. It wasn't always dramatic, but those shifts in perspective and understanding the meaning behind the symptom had a profound effect.
And dreams, too. You said they can trigger these moments.
Oh, definitely. A powerful dream can bring unconscious conflicts right to the forefront in symbolic form, acting as a catalyst for sudden understanding or emotional release when you reflect on it.
And you mentioned transference becoming more potent at this stage, as defenses lower.
Yes, very much so. As we feel safer and less defended, those old patterns and feelings from past relationships can emerge more strongly and get projected onto current relationships, especially a therapeutic one.
So you might suddenly feel unreasonably angry or dependent or mistrustful towards the therapist.
Exactly. And these seemingly disproportionate emotional reactions become incredibly valuable data. They offer direct insight into those deeply ingrained relational patterns and unmet needs from the past.
Can you give an example of how an insight like this might actually happen, maybe outside of therapy?
Sure. Imagine someone, let's say, who consistently finds themselves undermining their own success just as they're about to achieve something significant.
Okay, self-sabotage.
Right. Through reflection, maybe sparked by a conversation with a trusted friend or reading something or just a quiet moment of contemplation after another near miss, they might suddenly connect the dots. They might recognize a pattern linking this fear of success back to, say, a childhood fear of outshining a parent, or an old belief that they don't deserve good things.
An aha moment.
That aha moment, that's a significant crack appearing in the mirror, revealing a piece of the underlying dynamic.
And is that feeling Freud called the uncanny related to this, that sense of strange familiarity when an insight hits?
Yes, the uncanny often accompanies these moments of deep insight. It's that unsettling feeling something feels both strangely familiar, like you've always known it somehow, yet also completely new and foreign because it challenges your conscious understanding of yourself.
It sounds a bit destabilizing.
It can be, definitely. It shakes up our established sense of identity. But it's often a sign that something important is shifting, that genuine transformation is underway.
And you mentioned earlier that sometimes when people start digging into this stuff, things can actually feel worse for a bit. The healing crisis.
Yes, that's a very real phenomenon. As the psyche starts to reorganize itself, as those long-held defenses start to wobble and crumble, there could be a temporary increase in anxiety, or old symptoms might flare up.
Why does that happen?
It's partly the mind resisting the change, trying to cling to the old familiar ways even if they were painful. It's also the discomfort of facing difficult feelings that were previously kept at bay. It's often a sign, though, that the system is in flux and moving, albeit uncomfortably, towards greater health and integration.
It's interesting, how kids process difficult things through play. They act it out with toys.
A vital way they metabolize experience.
Do adults have equivalent ways of doing that, of processing difficult internal stuff?
We absolutely do. Creative expression is a huge one. Writing stories, painting, making music, engaging in rituals. These can all be powerful ways for adults to symbolize, process, and integrate difficult emotions, traumas, and internal conflicts. It allows for a kind of working through that might be too overwhelming to tackle just through direct conscious thought.
So as the mirror cracks, we start seeing all these different parts of ourselves more clearly, like the ambitious professional and the insecure child and the loyal friend. Not as separate boxes, but interconnected.
Exactly. We start to see the different facets of our personality, perhaps aligning with Freud's model of the impulsive id, the mediating ego, and the moralistic superego as interacting parts of a whole complex system, not just one simple reflection.
And as we become more aware, we might also notice that tendency you called repetition compulsion, repeating old patterns.
Yes. That unconscious drive to recreate situations, relationship dynamics, or emotional states from the past. It's not usually a conscious desire to suffer again, but rather an unconscious attempt, often clumsy, to somehow gain mastery over the original trauma, or finally achieve a different, more satisfying outcome this time around.
It really underlines how important it is to understand the symbolic language of our own minds, doesn't it? In dreams, yes, but also in who we're attracted to, what triggers intense anxiety, what metaphors we use.
Absolutely. Learning to decipher this personal symbolic code is crucial for deeper self-understanding. It's like learning the unique language of your own unconscious.
And the relationship with a therapist or even a really trusted friend becomes like a safe laboratory for this.
Precisely. The therapeutic relationship ideally provides a consistent, reliable, non-judgmental space where defenses can gradually be lowered because trust is built. This allows for that deeper exploration and the safe emergence of things like transference.
And memory in this context, it's not just like pulling up old files, is it?
No, not like accessing a computer database. It's much more dynamic. Forgotten experiences, or rather the feelings associated with them, often resurface through emotional presence in the present. An encounter, a smell, a piece of music can suddenly bring back a wave of emotion tied to a past event, even if the specific details aren't consciously recalled initially. It's an effective associative process.
And just having the insight, that aha moment, isn't the end of the story, right? There's more work to do.
Exactly. That leads to the crucial concept of working through.
Working through.
Yes, it's the active, ongoing process of engaging with these insights, exploring their connections, understanding their impact on different areas of your life, and gradually integrating them into your sense of self and your way of being in the world. It's not enough to just have the realization. You need to repeatedly process it, feel it, and apply it.
Like learning a new skill or language, you need practice.
Very much like that. It requires consistent effort and engagement over time for the changes to become truly embedded and lasting. An insight needs to be revisited from different angles, connected to different experiences.
So it sounds like our whole relationship with the idea of truth about ourselves changes through this process.
It really does.
Yeah,
It shifts from seeing truth as maybe something fixed, dangerous, something to be avoided or defended against,
right.
to seeing self-knowledge as a much more dynamic, evolving process, a process of becoming. Each layer of understanding doesn't necessarily provide final answers, but often reveals new questions, new layers, new areas for exploration.
So the cracked mirror never becomes perfectly smooth again. It just keeps reflecting this ongoing transformation.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Psychological growth isn't about arriving at some static endpoint of perfect self-knowledge. It's much more about embracing the ongoing journey, the complexity, the ambiguity, and the inherent uncertainty that comes with being human. Psychoanalytic work is about learning to navigate that fascinating, sometimes challenging territory between our conscious and unconscious realms without needing a fixed map or destination.
And the work doesn't just happen in the therapy room or in moments of deep thought. It ripples outwards.
Absolutely. The insights gained, the patterns recognized, the defenses softened. They extend far beyond any specific session or moment of reflection. They start to influence your choices, your perceptions, your relationships, your reactions in everyday life, creating these ever-expanding circles of influence within your psyche and your lived experience. It's a continuous unfolding.